Carrigallen, coordinating the setting up of a beatification committee in New Orleans. Who are closely working with us here to move forward the opening of Margaret's beatification process and Leitrim as a tourist destination. Laura D Kelley, a historian, history professor and a lady of determination, energy and great desire to travel the world. This is a beautiful illustrated book, entertaining and telling the adventures of courageous stories of the Irish people of America's exotic city of New Orleans. We are delighted also to have a Killishandra man, the director of the Hunt Museum in Limerick, to launch Laura's book here this evening. Hugh is an architectural historian by training and graduate of Trinity College, Dublin, and the Courtauld Institute of Art, University of London. Hugh has lectured at the Crawford College of Art, Cork and University of Otago, and the University of Auckland, New Zealand. Before returning to Ireland to work with the Heritage Council, he has also taught at the University of Ulster. At the Heritage Council, he was responsible for the museums and the archives policy provision, as well as promoting the care and welfare of Ireland's material cultural heritage, and for the rollout of the Council's accreditation programme for the sector, now with some 60+ institutions across the state. Since late 2009, he has been the director of the Hunt Museum in Limerick, where he has worked not only on sustaining the collection and venue through recent economic challenges, but has increased the diversity and footfall to the venue, underpinning its role at the heart of the cultural and heritage life in the city. Now, I would like to call on Laura to say a few words.
I'm a little taller. Hello. Oh, I laughed. I might do it this way. Hello. Hello. Thank you very much for coming out. Hello in there. I've never done a split kind of launch before, so this is very interesting. I hate microphones. As you can tell, I talk with my hands and I move, and a microphone keeps you situated. This book came out in late October last year. I've done launches in New York. I've done launches in New Orleans. I recently was in Dublin. This is the one I was looking forward to the most. And I say that from the bottom of my heart. And so we're not going to let a little rain stop me. Margaret is somebody I hold very dear. And actually, when I first started to research Irish immigrants, when I found out there was even an Irish community in New Orleans, it was the orphans that I studied first. And Margaret, of course, is known for all the work that I will stand here though. For all the work she did with the orphans. But what that did is it opened up for me a doorway into studying an Irish community in America that is so different than New York and Boston, Chicago. And to bring awareness, and I'm on a one-woman mission to bring awareness that there is in fact Irish in New Orleans, that, you know, not just the traditional cities that you think of. And it's a French city, it's a Spanish city, it's a Catholic city. It is very different experience for the Irish immigrants historically as it is today. We have a large Irish-born community there. And so this is, to me, to be here in Ireland, to be in this spot that has this direct connection with New Orleans. There is nowhere else in Ireland where that's the case. Yes, of course, many Irish went from here via Liverpool on the cotton ships and ended up making their home in New Orleans. But I can't stand in a place and say directly, this is the birthplace, and I know something about that person, and I know so much about Margaret. And so this brings me great pleasure to be here. I want to thank Becky for last year for taking time off of work to come out here to show me where it was, because I never would have found it on my own. I want to thank Maura and Helen for coming over last November and for developing this relationship, and it's going to be an ongoing, continuous one, and with Margaret at the core. The Irish are there, and when I was writing this book, It's not just the history, but every essay brings you up to the future. And I'm a historian, so I deal with dead people, but this book made me actually talk to live people. And I asked the Irish-born, why New Orleans? And some had lived in the States for 10, 12 years. Some of them had just come there recently. And almost to a person, they said that New Orleans reminds them of home. That they wake up and they hear the church bells ringing. Life is slower there. We have New Orleans time, so it's very similar to Irish time. And family is important, community is important, different values, and you slow down, you come together at any opportunity. Everybody brings food, so why I was surprised tonight to see so much food, I don't know. I should have known better. I think Maura threw me off when she said there would be tea, and I thought, oh, well, okay, tea is good. But we do this in New Orleans, and it's just heartwarming to be here. So thank you very much. I'm here to answer any questions. The essays cover everything from faction fights to football, to an essay on Margaret, to one about dance, and you name it. And it's beautifully illustrated, so even if you don't want to read it, you can look at all the pretty pictures in it. So thank you again.
Thank you, Laura. I'd like to call on Hugh to officially launch the book, please.
I'm nearly too tall to stand on the knees. I should be sitting down. Thank you very much. What do I say? When I was driving, I should acknowledge first the Cathaiorleach of the county and Laura. It's very difficult to speak when you have an articulate councillor and an articulate American academic. So there are two acts that are very hard to compete with in any given space. Driving up here this evening, it was quite balmy. It wasn't just quite as wet as it is now. And I was thinking, you know, we'd have a sentimental idea of this landscape, and we would be thinking, how could actually one contemplate leaving here? Because it was very pleasant, it's very leafy, it's very green. We're meeting it at the high point of summer. And you would imagine, how could anyone want to leave to go to New Orleans or anywhere else really? But I suppose we tend to lose sight of the fact of the sheer hardship and poverty that these hills evoke. The density of population here in the 19th century was of course far greater than it is today. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people concentrated into very, very small, tiny holdings. So it wasn't the great sweeping landscape that we see here before us. Instead, it was a landscape made up of very, very impoverished holdings altogether. And that sense of poverty, I suppose, continued right up until modern times. Tully is beside Drumderriglan, and Drumderriglan is my own kith and kin, I suppose. My father was from there. So it's a landscape and a soil with which I feel a certain affinity. 10 years ago, obviously before he died, I drove my father from Ballinamuck up this, what we call a back road, and down through Tully, down to Drumderriglan and into Carrigallen. And he knew his own death was imminent, I suppose, at the time. But he was able, remarkably, because he never travelled that road again, he was able to name more or less every farm holding between Ballinamuck and Drumderriglan. I thought that was quite remarkable. What I feel is remarkable is the sense of ownership of landscape and the ownership of place. And I think that's something that's very important in the Irish psyche. And in a way it links in with the book that has been published last year, because it's very fascinating how Irish communities, not only in New Orleans, but Sydney, Australia, New Zealand, which I know well, London, of course, we're all familiar with, and Britain in general, how Irish communities through the centuries have managed to sustain a certain sense of identity. And it's an identity that maybe is one of the imagination, or it's one based on a romantic sense of Ireland. I was struck by, and it's not a criticism, I was struck by how some of the senses of Irishness that are in the book are maybe very different to how we ourselves see ourselves here in Ireland today. But nonetheless, it is a type of Irishness, and it is something that people cling on to create and to emphasise their own identity when they're living far away from home. And I suppose it's a use of heritage to emphasise difference, to emphasise sustainability of community, to emphasise a wish to remain unique and distinctive and have a voice in the world and a voice in the great melting pot that is the United States. And I suppose it's not only in the United States that people have embraced these things. I think here in Ireland now increasingly, we ourselves are independent of government policy and independent of state policy. We are being forced to maybe embrace aspects of our culture and heritage that we've maybe ignored for centuries. There is no great state policy for culture provision in Ireland, sadly. And I think it's around the country in places like here in Tully, Carrigallen, Killishandra, wherever, that communities are more and more finding their voice, but they're also finding an engagement with aspects of their past that allows them to sustain the viability of their communities. I think when we travel around the country, it's a truism, it's commonly observed, our towns and villages are really on their knees. Even today, I came from Sligo to here today, and a number of places, Manor Hamilton, Dromahair, Drumshambo, and so on, Keiju, Ballysadare, Ballyfarnan, whatever. All these smallish towns are really fighting for their survival. Economically, they're almost finished. It's very difficult to see how they can be sustained economic units. Banks are gone, shops are closed, post offices are closed, libraries are under threat, and so on. And it's the communities like this that we actually maybe have to turn to find the lifeblood of a community. Carrigallen, for example, is very strong with its theatre and the Cornmill. The group here at Margaret of New Orleans, Birthplace, have embraced this project. And I think it's a project that is giving, it's a vitality, it's a focus for the community, it's a focus for the committee, it's a focus for people to come here and have an event and to have celebrations maybe next year as they had 2 years ago. And yet this is an aspect of our history, it's an aspect of our heritage. So I think it's and also in Drumshambo today I picked up some bottles of Carrig Pale Ale or something, which is newly being brewed in the old Laird's factory in Drumshambo. And again, I suppose that's like a heritage food product, people trying to find something new, looking to their past to try and create something that is distinctively of Leitrim or of Roscommon or Cavan or whatever. So just as the communities in the United States have embraced aspects of their Irishness to sustain their own community viability, I think we are maybe beginning the challenge of embracing aspects of our own distinctive stories, our own heritages, complicated and diverse as they are. And it's maybe through those stories that we're actually adding a new life, recreating our communities again, recreating our Carrigallens and our Drumlishes and our Killishandras and so on, because they are home to many people, and central government can't just ignore them and say that they don't fit into the economic pattern of the country. They are both the physical home of people, but they're also the spiritual home of people. And I think in projects as represented by the book, but also as represented by a venue like this, I think we're able to tap into the essence of the people. And I think that's something to be encouraged and nurtured. So anyway, if I had notes, I'd be worse. So, so you're getting the shorter version. So thank you very much. It's a very great pleasure to be asked to launch something like this, especially since my fields, so to speak, are over the hill. And I'm very honoured to do it, and I wish the book well. It is superbly illustrated, and it's wonderful to see that in a source that I'd forgotten about, that the Library of Congress has such a wonderful visual archive of Irish history. We're inclined to rely very heavily on the Lawrence collection and the National Library in Dublin, but that treasure trove of the Library of Congress is well worth checking out. So I'm sure there are loads of people in Carrigallen can buy that book, and they will, I'm sure.
I will, yes.
And they may be signed or unsigned.
They will be signed tonight, and for tonight only. Normally the book is €25. But I was asked, and I was happy to do it for this gathering and here at Margaret's Birthplace, Margaret of New Orleans, to have it for €20 tonight. And I was struck when you were speaking about community with the fact that we have the city council, we have the library, we have so many other people, Bernie, I forgot to thank, and also doing this without notes, and we have young people in here. We have all that, and that's a good representation of the community that's come out here today, and I do appreciate it. And the Library of Congress, you can download those images for free from the website. They have millions, and I just put in Ireland not expecting anything, and what they have is, part of it's included here, but I could do another book on it. So if it's something you're interested in and you don't have to pay someone for, and you can do it with your own computer, it is there. But better to buy the book and look at it and read the text in there too. So.
I suppose that's the difference in America. No? That's the American hard sell in the bottom line. So we better be true to form and let you sell the book.
Good.
So
thank you.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. Now, I would like to call on our Cathaiorleach, John McCartin, to say a few words.
The change too soon.
Well, nobody told me I was going to be saying a few words, so
It's ad-lib for the whole night.
I'll surely be going without notes. And I was cracking an old Rowan Atkinson joke to Philip McIntyre just before I came over, and Tony, I hope you're not going to personify this one. He said about the father of the groom, and he stood up and he said, "I'm going to speak now, much as the choir did earlier on, without any real notes." So I'll certainly be speaking without notes anyway. Look, it's an absolute pleasure on my first day of functions as Cathaiorleach of the county, not even wearing the chain, to be here in my home parish and to address a crowd of community. And it was lovely to hear people speaking about community here, because it is true, community is breaking down what we call the old pillars of community, and indeed the new pillars of community, the local shop, the local bank, the local post office. All of these things are breaking down, and economic prosperity and recovery will not bring those things back, because, you know, we're all culprits ourselves. I do my banking on my phone, I email, an awful lot of those pillars won't return. But people remembering what were previously cornerstones of their heritage and culture, I think is going to be the new cornerstone of community. And I think it's very heartening to see people here of all walks of life, of all ages, and of all interests gathering together to focus on a very important part of our heritage here, because we talk about how miserable, and it was alluded to, how miserable things were here when Margaret left. But she didn't go to the promised land. The Irish who found themselves in New Orleans encountered famine and illness over there and died in just as great of intensity as they were dying here at home. So there was a very sad story to the Irish journey, and I think it's very fitting that we remember it here we like to talk about how hard things are now. Things are not hard now, and I think it's very important that this community recognise that we're some of the luckiest people ever to have walked the face of this earth in the history of mankind, but we should never forget where we come from, and that will guide where we're going. So it's a pleasure to be here at the launch of this book, and to have been caught on the hop to say a few words.
You did a good job.
So, thank you very much.
Now, last but not least, I would like to ask Father Murray just to say a few words.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what my function here is actually, except that I have to talk, and some people say that I talk too much and too long. But anyway, Miss Kelly, Laura, is it? You're very, very welcome, and you have your friend, I was speaking to him there.
Behind you.
What's his name?
Thomas.
And Brian, of course. Brian is a kind of a native of this parish here, the Maguires, very much in the part of the thing. I was just listening there about the culture and things. I wouldn't be as pessimistic as people are, because for the last 45 years I have been working consistently in small rural communities, nearly most of my time in Leitrim, actually in Cavan, but most of my time in Leitrim, and they have a great ability to survive and survive very well and to make do. One of the big cultural changes that we don't realise over the last years is the motor car. It has changed everything utterly. People, even it changes people going to mass, because I sometimes get back the envelopes, you know. And they go to Killishan, and they go to Arba, and they go to places, and then they don't stop going to anywhere then, yeah. But anyway, the motor car has changed everything utterly, and the roads have become much better and all that. So it's a kind of a natural thing that the banks and the what do you call it, and the post offices and that, people are just, and then of course the local shops go, because everyone goes to Lidl, you know, and Aldi, and they buy strimmers, and they buy small lawnmowers, and they buy a whole lot of stuff that they don't need, and buy a load of plastic for the gardens, and that they don't put out at all. So the motor car has made this huge difference. And I was going through Scotland there last year, and the villages in Scotland, I can tell you, are a lot more worse than in Ireland. They're far more deserted, because they have nothing in Scotland really up around those highland areas. They haven't even got lush farmland, you know, for cattle and all that kind of thing. So like in Ireland, we are in a way lucky. Now, of course, our church too is going through a big change because of the movement as well, movements of people. There will be less masses in the churches in the next number of years, because people used to have to walk to the churches. You know, they walk to the schools, they walk to the churches, the small schools will be closing, people will be going in motor cars. They're even choosing now. So if you cannot blame, I think you cannot blame anybody for the changes, because people, as they say, choose with their feet what they want, you know. And again, a lot of people don't want to live in rural communities. They want to live in the big cities. They want the hotels, they want all that. So, but people who do, I think, are making do in the countryside and making a good life. And I think there's a lot of younger people coming back, and they're building houses, and they're able to travel to. One of the things we didn't remember was that people are able to travel to work now. Carrigallen, to Longford, to Cavan, all over the place. So even to Dublin, people coming back and forward here to work. So the whole thing is changing, and the whole thing is to embrace the change and to look for what is positive in it. So the history of New Orleans. I'd be very interested in New Orleans for one reason: Satchmo.
I have to interrupt right here, just because it's New Orleans. New Orleans, right? So the lesson New Orleans, but you can say New Orleans if you sing it. So even Satchmo, Louis Armstrong would say way down in New Orleans.
I mean, New Orleans.
Now you have to start singing. Of course,
it's from the French, of course, isn't it?
No, you've got to start singing now.
No.
You don't know what you're starting there.
No. I'd need my trumpet with me. So anyway, Margaret of New Orleans, I don't know what way we are anyway. It was the Americans that invented the word new, you know. But Margaret, of course, is the main reason why we are all here, and she's a marvellous figure of heroism. And I think I want to say that in our Catholic Church, and I suppose the other churches, went through an awful scandalous time in the where some priests and others abused children. And the great story about Margaret is the one who looked after the child, the one who looked after the babies and the small little children down there in the poverty of New Orleans. So I think, and the truth about Margaret is that she was a tremendous Catholic Christian. I mean, there are other Christians which are fine, they're not say fine, but there are other Christians. But she was a tremendous Catholic Christian all the way through her life. And she kept that going. And it was that Catholic Christianity that imbued her with this motivation to love her fellow man, especially the little children. And I think that's something that we mustn't forget about in the modern day secular society, the motivation to love one's neighbour, because if you don't love your neighbour, you can't have community. And so Margaret is a marvellous, I think, she's a marvellous icon and an example to somebody who could bring her Irishness, her spirituality, And one of the miracles is she left here about the 9 years of age, but she carried with her Irish Catholic Catholicism. And, you know, it was the motivating force in her whole life. Her Mass every Sunday, her prayer, her care came out of that spirituality. And I am not afraid, as a priest, to promote it.
Good thing to promote.
And to say that it is a basis. I mean, Brian is quite right about the culture now, but I mean, what has imbued our Western culture over the centuries has been Christianity, the care of the other person, the setting up of hospitals. I could go on and on and on, and I must stop now. And I mean, that was what she brought from Europe into the New World, was that imbued motivation that to love one neighbour as oneself was extremely important. And I hope that Laura has a very successful time with her book, that it looks well. I must get it. I look forward to reading it. And all those who are praying for Margaret's, what do you call it? Gratification. I don't see them down here on the grass every Sunday, but anyway, keep it going anyway. And keep the prayers, because that's the only way, actually, she will be beatified. There's no other way. So it's through prayer for her beatification that it will or will not happen. So keep the prayers going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. Now, I'd like to thank everyone here this evening: Leitrim Tourism, Leitrim County Council, our own committee, the first coordinator Terry Williams for keeping the grounds tidy, our musicians, catering team, the local press, and the newspapers, and Shannonside for all our advertising. The cottage is open every Sunday from 2 until 5 for visitors. And if you have anyone visiting, we'd love to have them here of an afternoon. I would like everyone to sign the visitors book, please. Now, we have a few musicians here. We have Veronica Kelly, Kate Riley and Orla Riley. They're giving us a lovely evening here playing. So I'd like to give you a big bullabus for them.